everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 49 in the series. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. This is a cast that's mostly about garments, garment modification, DIY, but I do a little spinning, and this year we're focusing on some fun knitting books. So if any of those things are of interest to you, you're in the right place. And for those of you who are coming back, it's so nice to see you. I've been having such wonderful conversations with so many of you through Ravelry and in the YouTube comments and over on the blog, and it's just wonderful to hear from you. So please keep the messages coming. It's lovely, lovely, lovely to have these conversations going on and to get to know some of you so much better. If you're interested in joining a larger group, we do have a Ravelry group over on Ravelry, and it's under Knitting the Stash, and I put everything in the show notes so you can find everything there. And the Ravelry group has, I think we're going on 600 or 700 members now, and there's tons of different threads, and there's an introductory thread that you can introduce yourself to me and to everyone else, and I'd love to get to know you. So head on over there if you're feeling like sharing and getting to know some of the crew here at the Knitting the Stash Ravelry group. I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois. We had a huge snowstorm this past weekend. Well, it wasn't really huge, but it was huge for here. I'm from New York originally, so I'm used to like a lot more snow, but this was like 6 to 8 inches or so, and we got to kind of play around in it. The dogs got to jump around in it, and it was really quite beautiful, and everything is really light right now because the snow is outside, and it's kind of still clean snow. It's not super dirty, gross snow, so that's been really nice. And my son talked me into going on a crazy ski trip next weekend. So you could see in my face, I'm a little bit like, ooh, good and bad. Good because I like skiing. We're going out to Colorado. I think there are maybe 10 adult chaperones and 40 high school age kids. And we're riding a bus for 14, 18 hours overnight, and then skiing on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then leaving Sunday night and driving in that bus overnight and getting home on Monday. So yeah, that should be quite an adventure, and I thought it would be really fun to at least go with my son. He's 14. He's only going to be 14 once, as I said in the last video. And so at the very least, even if he's staying in like a guy's condo and I'm helping chaperone the girls, some of the girls, we'll have a shared experience of going on the bus to Colorado and skiing on the slopes. And he's never skied before. I used to ski when I was a kid up into my 20s. So I'm hoping it's like a bicycle ride kind of thing. He just comes right back to you. And I want to be there when he tries to hit the slopes for the first time. So it should be a wild weekend, and that is where we're headed, to where there's more snow. Let's see, what else should I tell you? Where can you find me? Well, you found me here on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you can also find me as Knitting the Stash pretty much everywhere else, on Ravelry, obviously. On the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com, and I'm also over on Instagram as Knitting the Stash. So come visit me in all those places. I love to see what you're up to and friend you back and follow you back and keep those conversations going. So in today's cast, I have a bunch of different stuff. I have some notes on Lithuanian knitting that I want to talk about. We've got the first book in the series. I promised you in the new year we'd do a whole series of books. Some of them will be hard to find, some of them will be easier to find, but give you a sense of what's in them if you're interested in trying to find them on eBay or Amazon or something like that. I've got a new tutorial up that I just posted this past weekend. I'll talk a little bit about that. And an update on the sweater snafus. Things are going okay, and I wanted to give you guys a sense that things can get back to good even after some snafu action. And we have 2 different announcements at the end. I've got a giveaway announcement from Jen Arnall-Culliford, who you probably know, and I'll talk about her in a minute. We're going to do a blog feature on her next week, but she's giving away one of her beautiful patterns on the podcast. And we are going to start our year of modifications, KAL, which is going to be a knit along for all of us who want to continue the work that we've been doing on modifications for garments or for accessories. So I'll talk about that on the cast. Okay, first up, I had a wonderful, wonderful last couple of weeks with those sweater snafus. I wanted to give you an update. So the sweater that ended up being too big in terms of gauge, the person I was commissioning it for, the company I was commissioning it for, said, don't frog the whole thing. It's beautiful. It's a size 36 instead of a 34. Let's just finish it. I'll send a little extra yarn and then you can just reknit a 34. So that worked out pretty well, I think. I was very happy to tell you guys. It's always lovely when you have a finished object to not have to frog the whole thing, because it was a perfectly good sweater. And I thought that was very generous. So soon I will be able to show you the sweater and the next version of it, and that should be kind of interesting to think about. And in other sweater news, you'll remember I'm working on that beautiful kind of alpaca red sweater that is missing the front panel, because the front panel in the pattern is supposed to be knit sideways and have this kind of gathered thing up here, which I just wasn't really down with. And I told you in the last episode I was going to knit a front panel. So I did all my maths, and this is what my front panel is looking like. And there's some really bright sun coming in the window. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it. So what I've done is worked up a section over here that mirrors the section that, this is a sweater that has kind of like a third of the front panel already knit, and the rest of the front needs to be knit. So I did some ribbing on the bottom to mirror the ribbing that's already existing, and I did a stockinette portion that is roughly the same width as the stockinette portion on the other side. I continued with a little garter tab to match the garter tab that's on the other side, and then this is the lace panel. And I decided to go with, I think you'll be able to see this. You can't see it very well. There it is a little bit. I decided to go with this great elfin lace panel pattern chart that I found. I was kind of mucking around in a bunch of my stitch dictionaries to look for some good lace patterns. And I was looking through Barbara Walker's first book. I think it's called her first book, because she has 2, 3, and 4. Maybe there's a 5th one. There are so many of them. And I found a beautiful lace pattern there, but it was uncharted. And when I tried to chart it, I couldn't quite figure out what was going on, because the repeats were such that you had to chart a huge chunk of it, even though it was only an 8-stitch repeat. This book, this Barbara Walker book, was written before charts were really very popular, and her later books do have charts, some of them, but this first book doesn't. So I looked online for the lace pattern. It was, it's a pretty well-known lace pattern, and someone else had charted it, but that chart actually required I think a 2 or 3 repeat just to get it to go right, because on the wrong side you were also working lace. So it was complicated, and I thought to myself, I'd like this to be a somewhat relaxing knit, and I didn't want to be working lace on both sides and trying to keep up with this kind of crazy repeat that was going on. So I decided to go back to the drawing board, and I looked back through Barbara Walker's book to find something that was a little bit more chill. And I found a bunch of her eyelet patterns, which seemed really cool, and so I ended up looking up a quatrefoil lace, and that's what led me to this elfin lace pattern. And I'll show you. The elfin lace pattern is available online. You can check it out. You can get charts for it. So this is the elfin lace chart, and I found this online. I'll put the link in the show notes if you're interested in some elfin lace yourself. And the nice thing is, I think it produces, and I wish you could kind of see it a little bit better here, it produces these cute little, there you go, maybe you can see that. Yes, these great kind of like open work stitches, there it is. That are really quite beautiful, and I posted a picture of the original swatch on Instagram that had some errors in it, but you could see it a little bit there. So the nice thing about this is that for that particular sweater, it's such a lightweight yarn and such a lightweight sweater that it really needs this open kind of lace work to make it work. So I'm working on this little panel here. My goal is to get it up to the armpits, and then do regular raglan decreases like I did on the other side of the sweater, and shape the neck just a little bit, and it'll just be a front panel. I haven't decided yet if they'll be fake buttons or real buttons, but we'll get there on that. But that is your sweater update, and I think it's looking pretty good. It's coming along. I've been knitting a bunch of other projects, so this is kind of my in-between sweater work. But those sweater snafus are working out. So there is life after sweater snafu. And for so many of you, it was great to hear that you didn't mind hearing about my mistakes and errors, and that it's actually somewhat comforting, right, to hear other people talk about what went wrong rather than showing you all the beautiful things that went right. So I'll keep that up. I'll try to show you some more mistakes if they happen. The other thing I worked on this past week, knitting-wise, was that tutorial that I just released, and that is about the northeasterly blanket. Primarily, it was driven by the northeasterly blanket and the fact that I'm making that blanket modular. So instead of joining the strips as you go, kind of by picking up stitches, I want to knit a bunch of strips and then just mattress stitch them together. So the tutorial is about mattress stitching and garter stitch, which is different than stockinette, just a little bit. And it's also about what happens if you take this pattern that has a slip stitch edge on both sides and change it to have a knit stitch edge on both sides. What's it like to graft either slip stitch to slip stitch or knit stitch to knit stitch? So you can head over to the YouTube channel, and I think you'd be able to find that video pretty easily up there. I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. So putting up a new tutorial, that's part of my goals for this year, is putting up more tutorials about different kinds of bits and pieces of things that we're working on. Maybe I'll even put together a little tutorial about elfin lace or something like that. Who knows? A lot of you have been sending in great suggestions. I know some folks want a short row sleeve cap tutorial and those kinds of things. So if you have a suggestion for a tutorial, you have something that you're working on or some question about how a stitch works, please let me know in the comments here, send me an email, tell me something, send me a message on Ravelry, and I'll do my best to work your tutorial requests into the videos of the year. So that is happening. Let's see. What is next? You know, let me tell you a little bit about this wonderful conversation I had, because my friend Deanna, I get to see her maybe once, twice a year because she lives in New York, in Brooklyn. She used to live here, and she's recently taken up knitting again. And it was in part because her mom passed away, so she inherited all of her mom's yarns and her projects and her books and all of these things. And she's from Lithuania, and she's frequently going back and forth to Lithuania to visit family and things like that. And when she acquired her mom's stuff, she just kind of got this bug for knitting. And she came over and we were talking, and we started talking about Lithuanian knitting. And she was, because she said, I haven't been able to find anyone who knits like I do. Like if she's watching video tutorials or looking in books, and she's like, I can't quite figure out why what I'm doing is different from what I see a lot of people doing. And so we kept up the conversation, and it seemed like we finally got to the point where she's like, all my stitches are twisted. And that's the way she learned from her mom. And so I started looking into it. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I said, so was this like a technique kind of handed down? And she said, yeah, when I look back at the Lithuanian knitting books that I have that are from, I think she said they're from the 60s and 70s. And she said she'd share them with me. So I'm so excited to share them with you guys, hopefully. But she said that it's kind of like part of the tradition in Lithuanian knitting is to knit through the back loop and create these twisted stitches. And I was like, okay, this is really, really cool. I really want to know what's happening. So I started going online and searching around doing some research on Lithuanian knitting. And Donna Draconis has a book out. I think it's called The Art of Lithuanian Knitting. And I ordered a copy of it because I'm really excited to, like, this book covers a lot of the culture, the kind of history, the techniques, and then it has some patterns. So in doing this internet research, I found out that Donna Draconis has a website called Sheep to Shawl LLC, and as part of the book release for The Art of Lithuanian Knitting, she did a few posts on some of the specific techniques that she found as she was doing the research for that book. And it's a great reminder here to just pause and say, just like in spinning, I think the best teachers will tell you there's no right way to knit or right way to spin, and there's no wrong way to knit and wrong way to spin. There's just difference. There's a lot of different kind of approaches, historically, ethnically, even, you know, if you think about just person to person, people have different knitting styles. If you've ever watched anyone knit, people use their fingers very differently. They hold the needles differently, right? Just difference is good. And it leads to a much more interesting world. And so if you remember that there's no right or wrong way to do any of these techniques, and you start looking at a different knitting tradition, you can really actually help yourself reflect on your own tradition and what you see as kind of like the way that it's done is not the way that it's always done. It's just your particular way of doing it. So it turns out, as I was poking around in these tutorials that Donna Draconis posted, that what's going on in Lithuanian knitting, the best I can figure at this point, is that the reason Deanna was feeling like her stitches were twisted is that in Lithuanian knitting, when you purl on the wrong side, the tradition is that you wrap your yarn in a different direction than one would normally wrap yarn if you were doing knitting continental or an English method. So if you've twisted your stitch on the wrong side by wrapping your purl stitch in a different direction, then on the right side, what you get is the presentation of the feet of the knitting in a different direction. So this is from Donna's website. You can see it, I think. You can see the feet of that stitch there are kind of inverted from what you might see in a like an American knitting book. But what looks inverted is actually just because of the technique that's used on the wrong side. So once you're on the right side, what you need to do is you knit through the back loop and that untwists the stitch. It's kind of like magic, right? So that's why Deanna was in part at least talking about knitting through the back loop and not understanding why her knitting looked different from some of the American knitting books she was looking at. No right or wrong way. There's just choice and difference and some pretty interesting techniques. I'm like fascinated. This is so cool to find out about this tradition. So I'm waiting with bated breath for this Art of Lithuanian Knitting book to show up, and I'm waiting to get back in more touch with Deanna about these books that she has to kind of read through some of the old techniques. I think the books are actually in Lithuanian, they're not in English. So hopefully she can do some translating for me, and there'll be photos and some pictures and we can kind of figure it out. But I just thought it was such a fascinating conversation to have and to try to figure out that there are these different, I knew there were other techniques out there for knitting, but to encounter one that's so specific about twisted stitches and untwisting them is like really cool. So that's one of the books that I plan to share in our book sharing series here, is the Donna Draconis book and hopefully some of those books from my friend Deanna. So that was a really fun revelation, especially in light of the fact that the podcast this year, we're doing this kind of year of books that are either local knowledge, hard to find, specific techniques, those kinds of foci. So Lithuanian knitting will be one of them as soon as I can get my hands on some more of that technical material. The book I wanted to share with you today, as my segue, is this one called 7 Things That Can Make or Break a Sweater. And this is by Margaret Fisher. And I came across this, how did I come across this? I think one of you might have recommended it to me, and I really can't remember where it was. Maybe it was on Instagram, something like that. And I thought, well, that's an interesting little book. And I picked it up on Amazon as a used book for pretty cheap because it came out in 2008. And that's the thing about these knitting books, right, to start this discussion off, is that a lot of these books we talked about on the last episode are either local. So those knitting books that are in Lithuanian and not in English are an example of a kind of local knowledge that may or may not have been translated and spread more broadly than a kind of local community. And some of the other ones that we'll hopefully talk about are ones that are out of print. They're difficult to get a hold of. But still other ones, even more recent books, from 2008 or 1990s or the 80s, they're just harder to find because they're out of print or you can't get them used or they're prohibitively expensive. If you wanted to get this Donna Draconis book, The Art of Lithuanian Knitting, in like a hardcover, the original printing, the only one I could find was like hundreds of dollars. But luckily for us, that book was reprinted in a paperback edition, and that's the one I ordered. Okay, so anyway, this whole part of the podcast is about sharing these books, these local knowledges, and trying to get the word out that these books exist. And I'm going to start up a Ravelry thread so that we can all start sharing which books we love, which books we have that we think are hard to find but that we have a copy of. And so my hope is that there'll be a kind of mini interlibrary kind of loan thing going on between us, so that if someone was really in need of some information that was in a book that was printed in 1982 and no one else can get a copy of it, but someone has a copy, we could maybe share some of that knowledge back and forth. All within copyright law, of course. So let me tell you a little bit about the 7 things that can make or break a sweater. I was interested in this for obvious reasons. You guys know I like garment modification and I like design and sweater knitting, and so that is a huge focus for me. A lot of my library that I'm going to share tend to be design books, sweater books, garment books, and I've been kind of collecting them. Whenever I see an old, funky, weird garment book, we have like an idea store here where you can kind of go through and pick out old knitting magazines. Sometimes they're old knitting books. You know, those are the first ones that I gravitate towards, especially if they're 50 cents. I will take it. I will take 10 of them. So it's pretty clear why I would be interested in a book called 7 Things That Can Make or Break a Sweater. Now, the thing about this book is that it was a class for her. Margaret Fisher finished the Master Knitters program and graduated, and actually became one of the committee members for the Master Knitter program. And in doing so, she obviously developed a lot of specific techniques and some understanding of how and the whys of how the knitting works, knit stitches work and things. And so she was running classes, and then she turned the class into a book. So that's kind of the trajectory of how this book came into being, because it is a very specific kind of like small book that may or may not be of interest to like a lot of knitters. You know, it's going to be primarily of interest to people who are garment knitters. On the one hand. On the other hand, she showcases some techniques that are really useful and applicable to pretty much all knitting. So this book is broken down into 7 different things that make or break a sweater. And the 7 things are the cast on edge, increases in ribbing, slanting decreases, invisible increases, blocking, picking up stitches for bands, and buttonholes. Those are the things she thinks that a lot of knitters kind of like need a little technical help with. And then the other part of the book, the other half of the book is about, has a bunch of different sweaters. One of which is this sweater project that basically if you're working each of those 7 techniques, you then go work that. You're learning the technique in the first part of the book, and then at the end of the chapter she'll say, okay, go back and work section blah 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 of this cardigan pattern, which is a little baby cardigan, and it's the project sweater, and the project sweater allows you to then work the button bands and the increases and the decreases and the cast on, all that kind of stuff to practice it, and you come away with an actual object in the end. Now, I think that's it's a cool way to organize a book, you know, techniques and then their application, and this book, I guess, having done so much reading about sweaters, I didn't feel like I learned a whole lot from the techniques in this book. Not because they're not really important techniques, but just because they have been covered elsewhere, and they've been kind of normalized as things that you'd want to think about if you're garment knitting or designing. I mean, this is 2008, so we're talking 10, 11 years at this point since then, and knitting really is evolving on this kind of rapid scale. So a lot of the information in here, which may or may not have been readily available in 2008, is definitely now available to a lot of knitters, especially if you knit a lot of patterns, because designers are kind of taking on this information, and it just becomes this kind of normalized thing. Oh, this is how you do something. It's kind of like the academy. I'm a professor at the university, and, you know, I'll see a lot of, there'll be like some big swell of like, oh, you know, it's like when Foucault came around, everybody was like reading him, and now he's just kind of like normalized. People just kind of like just cite him and know him, and it's just part of it's like in the water, you know? And so this kind of stuff is like now in the water, I think, for a lot of designers, and in a lot of patterns that you're already knitting, the techniques are already kind of in there. So I didn't learn as much as I thought I would from this book. I did learn a few tricky, nice techniques and tips that I thought were pretty cool. And the other thing to think about if you're interested in picking this book up is that she is part of that Master Knitters program. And the Master's Knitter program, if you're not familiar with it, is a way to kind of get this certification that you've gone through all of these different levels. I think there are 3 different levels that you go through, where you produce particular stitches, particular swatches, and then in the end you produce, I think at this point, there's a hat, a sweater, something else, a pair of mittens. These are things that you kind of design and make all along. You write some reports. You know, it's a pretty involved process. I think it takes most people a couple of years to get through. And it's actually not for beginner knitters. It's for advanced knitters who want to hone their skills really specifically about certain techniques, be critiqued by other knitters in a constructive way, and get that kind of feedback. And so she's gone through that program, and she's actually part of the committee, and So this book is really very much focused on those tiny little things that she thinks really affect the way a knit stitch or an increase or a decrease or a piece of ribbing look, right? It's like, it's the feedback you'd get from the committee, potentially, if you were doing the Master Knitters program. So worth a read, especially if you're into garment knitting. If you're not as into garment knitting, you know, maybe pick it up from a library if possible. Some libraries aren't going to have these books that we're covering. But now you know at least what's in here if you're interested in picking up a used copy of it. And like I said, I got mine used, maybe $3-5 on Amazon, something like that. It's worth it for that. I definitely think so. So something to think about. And that's our first book share that we're doing on the podcast. So I'm pretty excited to get that started right away in January. Okay. Last, but certainly not least, we've got two things. One is a giveaway announcement, and the other is the announcement of our KAL, our year-long KAL for modifications. So let me give you the KAL information for those of you who are interested. We are going to be doing two different KALs. One is for garments and one is for shawls or other accessories, and I'll open up those Ravelry threads for us to start sharing. And basically there's a year. It's a year in which you can jump in here, and we're going to do both levels, so shawls and accessories and garments. And that means that if you're a newer beginner, intermediate knitter, and you just want to try to modify a hat pattern or a mitten or a shawl or something like that, you can still get in on this KAL, and it'll be really fun to kind of learn different kinds of techniques from you and have you guys share them with each other. So the idea is I'll open up these threads. You'll pick your pattern that you're going to modify, let us know which pattern it is and what modifications you're going to make to it. And try to start thinking about the why, like how do you explain these modifications to someone else so that maybe they could use them and make their own modifications. If you're interested in doing the garment modification, again, share your pattern and let us know how you're going to modify the garment and why you're going to modify it. And then we'll just kind of build on this as we go through the year. I'm hoping that these threads will be full of cool patterns and pattern modifications, and we can support each other and learn a little bit more about what are the tricks and tips for modifying garments and accessories. And I'm really hoping that it's accessible to everyone. If you're a beginner, it doesn't matter if your modifications are smaller, you know, you're starting out and you really want to figure it out, because modifications will help you understand patterns in a way that you never thought you could understand them. And then you'll become a better knitter because of it. So even if you're a beginner, please get involved. If you're a more advanced knitter, show us your skills. I want to see some crazy modifications. And I'd love to go check out that Ravelry thread and see what you guys are up to. We'll do some prizes along the way. I'm hoping to get some donations for prizes from some indie dyers, yarn companies, pattern makers, all that kind of stuff. So we'll have some prizes, and it'll be just a fun way to get involved and create more community around here. So that's our year-long KAL, modification KAL. All right. And the giveaway. Let me tell you about this giveaway. This is cool because I saw this awesome hoodie. I think it popped up on Instagram actually. And this is from Jen Arnall-Culliford, and she's designed some really beautiful, beautiful things. She has a website, Arnall-Culliford Knitwear, which I'll show you here, and I will put in the show notes. And as promised, I'm going to be doing a blog spot about her next weekend. I have that all ready and loaded, and we've done the interview, and it's really cool. The thing about Jen Arnall-Culliford is that she's done so much, and actually I didn't even realize until I started digging around because I found this hoodie pattern that she had done. It turns out she wrote a book that I had in my library already. This is something new to learn about cables, and she and her husband Jim, I believe, because he's written the introduction. They put together really specific focused books on particular techniques, and one of them is on cables, so of course I have it in my library. And I was just realizing that as I was poking around in her website and getting to know her a little bit better. Really cool book, by the way. Maybe we'll talk about this one on another podcast. And then, as it turns out, she's worked with Kate Davies, and I have the Book of Haps in my library. And Jen was the co-editor with Kate. Here she is. This is Jen. This is Kate Davies. You guys know her. This is Jen. who you may or may not have known before right now. Someone totally to know and look up. So both of those ladies, Jen and Kate, put together the Book of Haps, which is a really beautiful Kate Davies book. So it turns out I already knew Jen, but I didn't even know I knew Jen. And she is also the great brain behind the Year of Techniques, which many of you might have participated in. And it's a year of 12 patterns and tutorials that came out a few years back, dealing with a lot of different specific techniques, and you could jump in and if anywhere you wanted to, or you could do the whole thing. And there's an ebook that you can get. I'll put all these links in the show notes. But she's doing another Year of Techniques coming up this year, and so I think it'll be really cool. It could be a great way to increase your skills and work on modifications and things like that. So check that all out. Now, the pattern that she's giving away is called the Bruton Hoodie. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. This is it on Ravelry. Let's see if it'll pop up. There it is. And it's a beautiful hoodie, and what drew me to it is we were talking about men's knitting. We were talking about kind of better representations of some of the menswear sweaters that are out there in the community, and we talked about a few different knitters. We talked about a bunch of folks on Instagram, like Diaris, and we talked to Meta Spencer about his knitting. We talked about Rob on of Paddle to the Sea. He's Sarah of Fibertrex fella, and so we've been talking about men's knitwear a little bit, and so this hoodie really caught my attention, and it's actually something that could be worn by men or women. Here's a version of it for a lady, and it's just a really sweet little hoodie. So Jen has generously offered to give away a copy of the pattern for the Bruton hoodie. So if you want to get in on this giveaway, what I'd like you guys to do is leave a comment, as always, here on the YouTube page, over on the blog, or in the Ravelry thread, and leave a comment about what you think would be a great technique for another Year of Techniques. Like, what do you want to learn about? What are some of the techniques that you'd be interested in having video tutorials about, or pattern tutorials about, or patterns that go along with tutorials about? And let us know what you think. And you can, for inspiration, you can head over to Jen's website and look at all the different books she's put out, the different technique videos, all that kind of stuff, and see what's there and what is missing and what you'd actually like to see either her do or someone else do as a tutorial video. That would be really helpful to all of us. And yeah, and I'll put you in to potentially win this pattern, and I'll do a draw in a couple of weeks by random number generator. So good luck to everyone. And in the meantime, until I see you again, I will be skiing in Colorado. Oh my God. That'll be fun. The bus ride will be crazy. But I hope you all have something fun in mind for the next couple of weeks, and I will catch up with you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.